Okay, well, I'm going to get us started, although I do want to see, and I'm sure I'm going to get a flood of it in the Q&A or the webinar chat, but can people hear me right now? And I'm assuming a raised hand means yes. Yes, okay, great. Well, then thank you, everyone. I'm getting a lot of people saying yes, so thank you very much. We'll get started now. So again, thank you for taking your time out this week to talk about clearance preparedness. Today, we are going to talk about some of the rules, regulations, and directives that govern the clearance process. This is the longest one. One moment, please. And one thing that I will tell people is, yeah, we are recording this, so you don't need your AI recorders to record things. We'll just make sure it's available, to people after the show. So the one thing, let's see. We'll just get that done. Sorry for this little bit of, okay, very good. Okay, so this is the one class that we go into a lot of laws and things like that. So it's a little bit of a slog, but it's the purpose is so you understand your rights and responsibilities. And I promise to get to, if you're familiar with the term, the catch-22, that you need a clearance in order to get a cleared job, but in order to get a clearance, you need a cleared job. So we're going to talk a little bit about that difficulty. So again, we talked about where you can work inside and outside of government. We did a broad overview of the clearance process, and we last time, 2 weeks ago, did a deep dive into the start of the clearance process, the SF-86. I do want to remind people about the Q&A box. If you have any questions, just type away in there, and I will try to get to them before the end of today's class. The standard lawyer, especially as I'm going through rules and regulations, I am not a lawyer. I am not giving legal advice, especially if you are doing like an appeal for a rejected application. You really do want to see a real lawyer to get real legal advice. I'm just giving the overview of what the laws and regulations are. So where does all of this come from? And by this, I mean the process for getting the clearance. Well, it's the law, as well as a set of executive orders, presidential directives, and regulations. The key point is that everyone's treated the same. If you go back 70 years ago, the ability to get a clearance was about which elite university did you go to and which Episcopal church did you go to. It's not that way anymore. Everyone's treated the same. The rules are clear, or as clear as they can be, and they're uniform. And things like protected status, such as age or national origin or sex, excuse me, cannot be used against you. And this cuts across agencies. One issue was if you got a clearance in one agency, you'd have to start all over again if you went to another agency. And after 2008, there was a presidential directive that we're going to talk about that made the clearances somewhat portable. So the first level of clearance is public trust. And this is for most any federal job, so not just cleared ones. And these are kind of the security requirements for government employment. And basically, sort of the key phrases here that we want government employees to be reliable, trustworthy, of good conduct and character, and of complete and unswerving loyalty to the United States. That's, I think most people would find that to be a very reasonable requirement for pretty much any government employee, but especially a government employee that has been given some responsibilities of trust. So now we get to the executive orders. So Executive Order 10450 basically says that everyone gets treated equally. It's not that you went to the right schools and go to the right church and frankly are the right gender, but it's saying that everyone gets fair, impartial, and equitable treatment. Um, One thing I bolded here is it is a privilege to work for the federal government. It is not a right. And that is actually some of the basis for the adjudication that if you are found lacking in trustworthiness or allegiance to the United States, you don't automatically get the job. It's a privilege. Uh, and we want to make sure that everyone has minimum standards. And that's part of the enabling portability, that if you have a clearance from one agency, then all the agencies know you have some minimum standards and that some minimum procedures were done to do that adjudication. Section 3A of Executive Order 10450, basically we do the depth of investigation as appropriate. If you are handling tax returns, would have a different level of clearance than if you had the job that launched nuclear weapons. We're trying to tailor the clearance process to the kind of information you're going to have access to. By the way, when we talk about the depth of the investigation, I know we had a couple of questions about this in the first seminar, and that is, how do we know that you're trustworthy? Well, part of it is, as you saw in the SF-86, there's questions of where have you worked? Did you get fired from jobs? And the police records, have you been arrested? Have you been found guilty of crime? So these are all things that are in scope, but again, it's as appropriate. And again, as detailed as needed. So if you're going to be in a very sensitive national security position, you're going to get what we call the full field investigation. You will have the FBI knocking on your neighbor's doors, not just talking to your friends. Part of the catch-22 is how do you get started? Well, one thing is this concept in Section 3B of interim clearances. So if the process is started, and we're going to get into this in a little more detail, you could get an interim clearance for a limited period. For those in the audience that are, say, undergraduates, this is often how you can get a job with an agency that requires a clearance over the summer. Is after a couple of weeks, they're able to get you an interim clearance. It's not the full clearance, they're still doing the investigation, but it means you can get started. Something to be aware of is continuous scrutiny. So it's not the case that they do an investigation and then you're good to go. You're continuously being scrutinized. Your activities will be continuously reviewed. And if something comes up that's not consistent with holding a clearance, you may lose your clearance. So one of the results of that is stay good. If you do have an issue, you can immediately have your clearance revoked. And there's not that much, in a sense, you can do about it. And in fact, you can lose your job. You can be prosecuted. There are a lot of bad things that can happen. Now here is where, how should we say, things get interesting. And again, it's coming up with what are those minimum guidelines. So things like behavior activities or associations that say that you're maybe not reliable or trustworthy. If you have close connections to organized crime, you're probably not going to be eligible for a position of trust. Here's when you probably heard in the last class, be completely truthful in your SF-86. Be completely truthful in your interviews, because this Section 8, subsection 2, any deliberate misrepresentations, falsifications, or omissions of material facts, that's a basis for denying clearance. Clearly, if you're doing bad stuff, that's going to be a problem. I did put in brackets sexual perversion. This executive order comes from the 1950s, and that clause, sexual perversion, was explicitly to force the LGBTQ community out of national security positions. That is no longer a criteria. The bad behavior still is. And oh, by the way, if you're asked about it, thing number one is it's protected status. So, you have to question why you're being questioned. But again, what they were looking for was, are you misrepresenting yourself? There is an agency that was actually rather famous for being welcoming at that time the gay and lesbian community, but you had to disclose. And if you didn't disclose, even though the agency was uh, welcoming, that would be grounds for termination, because again, deliberate misrepresentation. Do you have significant defects in judgment? Are you continuously hanging out with the wrong people? Are you finding yourself, adjacent to things getting in trouble? Well, we want to make sure that people have good judgment, that we're going to be offering information in sensitive national security positions. Sort of this number 5 here, that was sort of the justification for repressing the LGBTQ community. And that's why that particular agency, what they cared about was not, are you gay or lesbian? What they cared about was basically, are you out of the closet? Because if you were in the closet, you could be subject to coercion. If you're in debt, you could be subject to coercion. So that's part of the adjudication process is, are you in a position that you might be subject to coercion? I This is a very dense slide, but the bold part is the important. If you are committing terrorism, if you are committing treason, obviously you're not, you shouldn't have a position of trust, public trust. If you have a sympathetic association, so you are a member of a terrorist organization, if you are married to an anarchist, that's going to be an issue. And likewise, if you remember going over the SF-86, some of the last questions are you advocating for the violent overthrow of the government? Clearly, that is not an appropriate position for someone that should have a public trust. And then one of the explicit guidelines is basically, don't be stupid. Uh, Intentional unauthorized disclosure to any person of security information. That's, Edward Snowden. That was definitely an unauthorized disclosure. Bradley, or now Chelsea Manning, clearly that information that was disclosed was not with authorization. And Jack Tejera, again, his leaking of information which was really a willful disregard of the security regulations. You see him there, all these people, well, sorry, take it back. Chelsea Manning and Jack Teixeira, have been prosecuted. Uh, Edward Snowden is living the life in Russia. I would not advocate that for anyone. So, what are the kind of parameters for access to classified information? Well, first is we have classification levels. Remember, I started off with tax information. Uh, and we'll talk about that. That's CUI. But here are kind of like the three levels. And again, this is if you play soccer, uh, this is very much like fouls and misdemeanors. There's confidential information. This is where unauthorized disclosure would be reasonably expected to cause damage to the national security. It's bad. I'm not saying it's okay to do, but it's, how should we say, not the end of the world. Now, secret information is information that unauthorized disclosure would reasonably be expected to cause serious damage to the national security. So confidential, that's a foul. Secret, that's a yellow card. You're now getting to the place where, it's reasonable to expect that people could get hurt, serious damage. And top secret is where that information, would be reasonably expected to cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security. This is kind of like the end of the world kind of stuff. That's the red card. That's the highest level of classification. Now, you may have heard of some other terms that are often heard when we talk about clearances. For example, it's rather common if you see an advertisement in USA Jobs or an advertisement for a contractor where they're looking for people with a TS/SCI. So the TS refers to that top secret clearance, that you have been shown to be trustworthy enough that we can trust you with information that could cause exceptionally grave damage if it got out. But this is information that we need to take special care of, and that's the sensitive, compartmentalized or compartmented information. All information is need to know, but this is like super need to know. And you need to be taught, sort of the procedures and the environment for handling that kind of information. And so that's TSSCI. Programs that tend to be SCI are special access programs. So again, it's determined that even if you have a top secret clearance, you need kind of special criteria for having access to a program. Then we have the most bizarre one, which is controlled and classified information. So here we're getting into things like tax information. It's not causing grave danger to the United States if someone steals my tax information, but it is kind of harmful for me. It's not classified information, but it's controlled. So that's where again, the public trust comes in. We don't want just anyone to have access to this information, but clearly we do not need as deep a background investigation as someone who would be having access to TS/SCI information. In a sense, life wouldn't be complete if we didn't have unclassified information, something that doesn't fit into all those other categories. Again, we're talking about harmony between agencies. The Department of Energy, for historical reasons, they didn't go with secret and top secret. They went with Q clearances and L clearances. If you watch the movie Oppenheimer, He was waiting for his Q clearance. That's like the top secret level. And again, with the executive order, we actually, again, you shouldn't need to restart the process if you go from a TS position to a position that requires a Q clearance. You may still probably have, you know, some investigation, but you shouldn't be starting from scratch. One thing that many people, until you get indoctrinated, don't really realize, you know, just because someone has a top secret SCI, highest level of clearance, that doesn't mean they get to see even some CUI information. Because step one, you need to be eligible for access. So if it's top secret information and you only have a secret clearance, you may not see that information. You've not been cleared to see the top secret information. But even if you have that top secret clearance, you need to have a demonstrated need to know that information. If you do not have a demonstrated need to know, you don't get to see the information. And that kind of makes sense because why are you seeing it? We're trying to reduce the chance of unauthorized disclosure. And clearly you cannot disclose information you don't have. So we only want people who have a demonstrated need to know to have access to that information. And then you sign an approved non-disclosure agreement. Most of these non-disclosure agreements, they're kind of doubling down because when you go through the process, you sign off saying, yep, I'm going to keep everything secret. Well, here you're signing off that you're going to keep this information. It's going to be disclosed to you secret. And you're understanding, you're signing off, you understand if you do that, you're in felony territory. And quite often those NDA agreements, the non-disclosure agreements, are for life. So even if you are in a job for a couple of years, then you retire or whatever, that doesn't mean you can now start disclosing secrets that could cause grave damage to the national security. I mentioned it before, but you know, re-emphasize, and again, it's not done capriciously. Continuous monitoring. So you're going to have consent. You're going to give consent in exchange for having the clearance that they'll basically be able to monitor things like your bank account. And what are they looking for? If you are in a GS-13 position, you're making $110,000 a year, and all of a sudden you've deposited $250,000 of cash in your bank account. That's going to raise some flags. Or for that matter, all of a sudden you got huge credit card debt. That's going to, you know, set a flag. One of the things that you're required to do when traveling overseas, you need to report that you're going to go, and then you need to report when you get back. And so clearly, you give permission to the agencies to basically exchange with CBP. Huh, you didn't say that you were going on a trip, and we see you've come back from Russia. Probably going to get some questions. Again, always disclose. Diving a little bit deeper on financial disclosure. So some of the things you're going to do is file kind of what are your holdings, and you're going to keep that up to date at least annually. So for example, if you own a bunch of stock in a foreign government sponsored company, which could cloud your judgment, you need to make sure you've disclosed everything. So this is kind of the big one. So reciprocity. So basically what it's saying is an agency can't just decide, yeah, we're special. We're not going to accept anybody's clearance. At a baseline, the clearances should be reciprocal. If you've got a secret clearance from one agency, you should be able to have a secret clearance someplace else. Well, they can't do it capriciously. They can't do it because they feel like it. But if there are special circumstances for a different agency or a different position, then they can have additional information they can look at. For example, if you get a TSSCI from one agency that does not do polygraph tests, and then you go to another agency where the TSSCI does require a polygraph, you're probably not going to have the complete TSSCI uh, investigation again, but you could have that polygraph because it's an additional thing. Uh, this is a question, we've already had this question from some people here, which is, can a foreign national get a clearance? This is one where, like I said, here's the rule that says it's possible. I don't know anyone who's gotten this. I'm sure someone has because we've got this rule. And again, it's going to have a very thorough investigation. And you notice that if there are any doubts of giving access, you don't get access. So this is one of those things where, yeah, the rules say you can do it, but unlikely. And again, this is where we get, and it's explicit, pretty much we're only going to grant access to this information to United States citizens. Recall I said that Executive Order 10450 was your grandfather's executive order, maybe your great grandfather's executive order. So basically, Executive Order 12968 makes clear that the federal government does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or sexual orientation in granting access to classified information. In the 1950s, race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, those were kind of criteria that could be used. No more. Now, you can still, be investigated for kind of that bad conduct, that misconduct, that trustworthiness. But explicitly, sexual orientation was 12968. There's also Executive Order 14168, which does put things a little bit cloudy. That executive order might impact trans people who are applying for a clearance, but that has not been litigated yet. Another thing about Executive Order 12968, we had a couple of questions before about, well, what if I got treated for mental health problems? What if I had credit problems and I got credit counseling? Counseling can be a positive factor. Yeah, it wasn't great that you went into debt or had some mental illness issues, but the fact that you got counseling and dealt with it, that could be sufficient to say, well, yeah, you had these issues, you've gotten over them, you've been doing well for a couple of years, then you can still get a clearance. One question that just came up, and I will remind people about the Q&A box. If you have questions, feel free to put them in. And the question is, besides actual crimes, what does bad behavior mean? So gambling is legal. It's not like marijuana, which we're going to get to in the next session. But chronic gambling debt, probably bad behavior. Actually, an example we used to give, now it is pretty much illegal, but sexual harassment. And maybe, how should we say, harassment that doesn't quite, actually would still be in the legal definition, creating a hostile work environment. That's kind of bad behavior. And unfortunately, I've got a Zoom opportunity here, so I can't say that I've answered that, but consider that answered. There's another question in there that I will get to. Um, so there's kind of a summary in 12,968. Basically, all right, you've had a clearance, you've been in a job, you retire, you switch, and you're now a salesperson for a cloud provider. Uh, if you don't need a clearance anymore, you don't get to keep it. It does go away because, again, remember, it's not just do you have a clearance, but do you have a need to know. So if you clearly had no need to know, your clearance is going to go away. If you are denied a clearance, there is a Byzantine process for protests. Uh, it's a very difficult process. It can be expensive, uh, and quite often it's even better to just let that lie, wait a year, and reapply. This is where I will definitely say, don't take my advice. If you are denied a clearance and you feel like they made a mistake, and they do make mistakes, uh, contact the facility security officer of the company or agency that's getting you the clearance, and quite probably get a real lawyer. The buck stops with the agency head. Technically, it's the agency head that's saying that this is a cleared position, or the agency head who says no. And when the agency head says no, that's final. There's no appeal. And you notice here I've got a link, and you'll see the link when we post this, to a thing called a seed. Again, we don't make up these rules arbitrarily. It's all written down so that everyone can know what they are up ahead of time and everyone gets treated the same. Uh, there are these security executive agent directives. And to be clear here, the executive agent for national security is the director of national intelligence. So this is how the DNI, their organization, executes the security directives. So, questions on adjudication. How do we determine like your allegiance to the United States? And there are guidelines that are published in SEED 4. And you'll notice that there are a number of uh, different guidelines. And you might remember as you walk through the SF-86, these guidelines map pretty closely to the different sections of the SF-86. The SF-86 is asking you questions that you can give information sufficient for the adjudicator to determine, do you have sufficient allegiance to the United States? Are you potentially under undue foreign influence? So let's look at a few of these. This is one that actually kind of also addresses that bad behavior question. If you're continuously lying or deliberately leaving things out, that's an indicator of bad behavior. Now, here's one that also comes in: credible adverse information in several adjudicative issue areas. So again, that's these different guidelines. All right, you left something out on sexual behavior. That alone might not cost you the clearance. But if you left something out on sexual behavior and left something out on criminal conduct and left something out on foreign influence, then the adjudicator can say, yeah, there's several areas where you got a lack of candor. You're not giving us the whole truth. You're not being reliable. You regularly break rules. So you might remember one again in the last section of the SF-86, basically is asking, do you abide by the acceptable use policy for your information technology systems? All of you have a .edu address, and having a .edu email address login, all of your colleges and universities have an acceptable use policy. And so if you're violating that acceptable use policy, it's not illegal necessarily. Maybe some things are, but maybe you're not allowed to run a business on the campus network. Uh, Not illegal, but you're showing that you don't care about rules. You're not following rules. Well, if you're not able to follow rules where it doesn't count, can we really trust you to follow rules when it does count? So that's why we're looking at the whole person. Another is, again, if you're hanging out with organized crime, if you're hanging out with drug dealers, if you're hanging out with human traffickers, uh, that association is not going to make the adjudicator feel comfortable that you're a trustworthy person. So, we talk about all these don't do's, but again, to have everyone have the same rules, there are mitigations. For example, and this is addressing one of the questions that came up, and I just came back from a trip to Japan and India. And when I went to check in for my flight back to the US, my flight was canceled. And I was about to have to come back through three different countries that I didn't plan on going to. That's okay. Because remember, I said you have to ask for permission up front, and then you do a report when you get back. Well, there's literally a drop down on that report that says, hey, it didn't happen the way I expected it to. Here's where I actually ended up. So I will be making, well, actually, after 17 hours, I was able to come back on the original itinerary because it turned out my flight was not canceled. But had it been canceled, as long as I promptly reported it, and especially in a situation like that, where there are travel problems, uh, no one's going to blink twice. If it takes me a month to report it, or if my routing back was from India to Iran to England to here, and I said, "Oh yeah, I came from India to England to here." That's an omission, not saying that I stopped in that country in the middle. That would be a problem. Uh, Another is, remember, I keep saying, if you are having adjudication problems, if you get a lawyer and that lawyer tells you, hey, don't answer that, you don't answer it, right? You're acting under the advice of counsel. But you do have a requirement to cooperate. So as long as you cooperate fully and truthfully, if you have a lawyer that says, hey, you can't answer that question, you're still cooperating. Another is, let's say you had some minor offense. You shoplifted when you were a kid, and it's now 20 years later. Uh, do report if the question says, have you ever? Because clearly, if it's like, have you in the past 7 years or 10 years, that time would have passed. But if it's a minor infraction, you had a speeding, actually speeding tickets Well, there's speeding tickets and there's reckless. So you had a reckless thing again when you were an undergraduate, and it's been quite a while, and you don't have any speeding tickets since then. So that's infrequent, time has passed, potentially minor, and it's unlikely to recur. So I'm going to actually take a variation on one of the questions in here. Let's say you did have some financial trouble, uh, and it was because of illness. Illness is kind of a unique circumstance and unlikely to recur. So again, those kinds of things are taken into consideration in the clearance process. Uh, D, I had a gambling addiction, and by the way, I don't have any gambling, but I'm just using that as an example. I had a gambling addiction. I went for counseling, and I've been clean. I don't gamble anymore. So that's kind of a combination of C and D. Acknowledged you had a potentially problematic behavior. You obtained counseling, and you know, section C, the time has passed, you're okay. Uh, E, an example here is, uh, let's see, vulnerability to exploitation. You've been dating Russian models who just showed up on your doorstep unannounced. If you watch The Americans, even though it was a counter intelligence operation, did you really think that that pretty girl would just show up? Well, maybe they do, but if you then say, hey, let's break it off, again, that's seen positively. And here's a question here. So the information was unsubstantiated or from a source of questionable reliability. And there are two parts here. Uh, One part is the second part, questionable reliability. Uh, if the organized crime cousin is trying to get you in trouble, or an ex-spouse, because we also have people who are doing career transition, things like that here, and they make kind of a wild uh, accusation, uh, that's it's going to be considered. Now, it might be still investigated, but that's where the first part comes in if it's unsubstantiated. So on the one hand, if like a repeat offender serial liar is trying to say, don't trust this person, the adjudicator actually, can immediately say no. But more often it does get looked at, and then if it's unsubstantiated, it goes by. And again, this last one, I've kind of beaten it to death, but if you did used to hang out with the drug dealers and you haven't done it for a while, or you didn't know, and by the way, once you found out that they were involved in illegal activities, you broke off your association with them, that says, yeah, you're probably a reliable person. Um, I will get to this one. Let's say uh, your identity has been stolen, and so your credit score, and I'll use the term here, is tanked. Because remember, we'll look at your credit score. Well, that is a mitigating circumstance. Presumably, you can demonstrate that your identity was stolen. You can demonstrate you filed a police report. You can say, hey, look, here's my real income. Here are my real liabilities. That is definitely taken into consideration. Now, if you're kind of a repeat offender and you can't come up with the no, really, it's not me, you might have some trouble because again, we want to kind of make absolutely sure the people who have access, especially to the top secret information, things that can cause exceptionally grave danger to the national security, are reliable people. Social media, definitely in April. This will be in the last session. I'm going to do a deep dive here, but at the high level, yes. If you're posting things publicly, it's public information. The government can and will monitor. So if you're saying in your SF-86, oh, no, 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 I would never advocate for the violent overthrow of the government, and you post on Twitter, yeah, let's burn down the White House, that's going to be a problem. However, and this is from real life because some agencies said, give us your passwords. We want to see your private stuff. We want to see your non-public posts. We want to friend to you so we can get around the fact that some of your posts might not be public. They can't compel you to do that. And we'll talk about that a lot more when we get to the social media session. How long is it active? Well, on the one hand, the government monitors your credit report, your arrest records, financial transactions. If something's suspicious, you're going to get flagged and you're going to get investigated. However, there are still periodic investigations. For top secret, again, you have access to information that could cause extremely grave danger to the United States if it gets out. Every 5 years, you could have a periodic investigation, 10 years for secret and 15 years for public trust. But basically every 5, 10, or 15 years, you fill out what's called an SF-86C. They might look at it and say, yeah, nothing's really changed, so we're pretty good. Also reminding though, if you don't need a clearance, you don't get to clear it. Seed 8 is the catch-22. You need a clearance to get a cleared job, but you can only getting a clearance by having a cleared job. So we've got the temporary clearances. And again, written down so everyone has the same treatment. If someone has reviewed, they've looked at your SF-86 and you haven't checked off, I'm a drug dealing serial rapist, indebted to Russian mafia. They've verified that you are a US citizen. They've started the investigation. You've had your fingerprints checked, your name checked, National Crime Information Center checked. If all that is good, then you can get an interim clearance. Now, there is some reality. I have had some students that got this interim clearance, temporary clearance in weeks. Others where after 2 years, they finally get their clearance and they had to do something else kind of in the meantime. So as promised, we're going to get drug use will be our next class, do a deep dive there. We're going to talk about cybersecurity authorities, laws, and regulations. On the one hand, it sounds kind of like this one, but it's a bit more interesting. And then social